Welcome to this new video where I've decided to change my own rules and build two models simultaneously. I chose this approach because the molds of these Academy F-15C kits are identical, with the main difference being their paint schemes. On one hand we have this MSIP2 Eagle in what I would call the standard two-tone camouflage. And on the other hand, the 75th D-Day Anniversary Eagle comes in a quite unusual paint scheme, featuring invasion stripes as well as large decals. While the box arts are quite impressive and the contents looked promising, I do have to say that I was a bit underwhelmed by the overall quality of these kits. More on that later. As always, make sure to leave your comments below. Any feedback is highly welcome. Also check the timestamps if you are only interested in a specific part of the building process. The assembling process started with the removal of the flaps on one of the two models. I used the razor saw to cut them off, allowing me to mount them at an angle later. A significant amount of work went into scribing the rivets on both aircraft, for which I used the Revell riveting tool. Adding rivets has become a standard procedure for most of my models. Although it requires a lot of research and patience, I believe the extra surface detail is well worth the effort. The next step was the assembly of the cockpit. The decals provided by Academy added sufficient detail to the instruments. Therefore my only additions were a head-up display cut from thin plastic foil and painted with Tamiya clear green, as well as seat belts made from masking tape. Next I assembled and mounted the air intakes. There is a bit of detail inside, which is a shame since you can only see it from a very specific angle. This front part of the air intakes consists of several parts, which was problematic. As you can see, this design resulted in gaps, no matter how careful you are during assembly. Even more gaps appeared when attaching these intakes to the fuselage. On both models it seemed impossible to glue these intakes into place without creating any gaps. More problems occurred where the upper and lower fuselage parts meet. Therefore a lot of putty had to be used. I wet sanded it down, which was a tedious process, as usual. Once that was finally done, I masked off the canopy. If you have trouble with canopy masking, check out one of my tutorial videos linked above. As a primer, I used Ammo of Mix Black One-Shot Primer. Then I applied the first coat of paint, which was Hataka FS36251 Aggressor Grey. On the MSIP Eagle, I then used Alclad's Mod Eagle Grey or FS36173 for the darker patches. As you can see, I didn't do any fancy masking this time. I simply outlined the areas I wanted to paint with a pencil and followed these lines with the airbrush. Then I just filled in these areas, trying to achieve a weathered and irregular paint job. I've been using this Harder and Steenbeck Evolution with a 0.2mm nozzle for quite some time now, and it's proven to be a precise and reliable tool. The painting process on the D-Day Eagle continued with pre-shading the upper side, using this stencil. It's so effective at creating random patterns that I use it on almost every model. Then I had to paint these invasion stripes. In the past I often had problems spraying white paint, but it works really well with this Mr. Color paint. For the best result I cut masking tape into strips of identical width. Then I simply applied all these strips onto the model and removed every second one. I hope that makes sense, but you can also see it demonstrated here in the video. The areas not covered by tape were then airbrushed using black paint. The result after removing the masking tape was very satisfying. Therefore I used the same technique for the invasion stripes on the wings. As you can see, it worked flawlessly here too. For the special two-tone paint scheme of the D-Day Eagle, I got myself the paints recommended in the manual. I started out using Mr. Color's gray-green. Of course, I used masking tape to protect the invasion stripes. As you can see, I applied light coats of the gray-green so that the pre-shading would remain slightly visible afterwards. To mask off the areas for the second color, I cut out the shapes from paper and secured these masks using Patafix poster tack. This khaki green from Mr. Hobby was thinned with Mr. Leveling Thinner and also sprayed on in several thin layers. My masking technique worked reasonably well, but I did some touch-ups to get a smoother and more even result. For the larger areas, I once again used a combination of paper and Patafix to create masks. This process might look quite simple, but trust me, it took quite some time to mask and paint all these areas without encountering any overspray or other issues. Nonetheless, I took my time and was quite pleased with the results. The areas around the canopy needed to be black. Instead of using the decals provided by Academy, I decided to paint them for a more realistic finish. Again, this meant that I had to invest some time into masking. Now that the main camouflage patterns were painted, it was time to focus on the engine section. Both models were masked off before airbrushing MRP silver onto these areas. A black base underneath metallic components is always a good idea because it boosts the contrast and provides more realism. To replicate the effects of heat created by the engines, I applied fine layers of MRP's burnt metal blue. It might seem like I have overdone this effect here, but I knew that the subsequent weathering steps would tone it down a bit. The next area to work on were the engine nozzles. Painting them was straightforward. The interior was painted black and dry brushed with metallic paints. For the D-Day Eagle, Academy included these decals here for exhaust stains on the insides, which is fantastic. The assembly, on the other hand, was quite tricky, because these nozzles are made up of so many tiny parts. I used a razor saw to remove them from the sprues to avoid damaging them. Once all 4 nozzles were assembled, I mixed this dark metallic paint and airbrushed them. Then I applied some dry brushing and did a few touch-ups. Now that the paint job was more or less completed, I removed the protective masking tape from the invasion stripes. I was delighted to finally see the Anniversary Eagle in all its glory. Well, almost, because there were still tons of decals to be added. Unfortunately, there was a significant difference in quality of the decals between the two kits. While the decals of the D-Day Eagle worked just fine, I had issues with the decals of the MSIP Eagle not adhering to the surfaces at all. Consequently, I experienced some problems with silvering on the MSIP F-15, which wasn't the case on the D-Day version, even though I followed the exact same steps for both models. What helped me a bit with that issue was trying out products like gloss and matte varnish from VMS. I also gave their 2-in-1 decal solution a try, but found it quite aggressive towards the paint. I ended up using multiple layers of Mark Fit Strong as well as Tamiya's decal adhesive. The decals were applied on a super glossy surface that I also sanded down using 7000 grit sandpaper. Still, some of the decals showed silvering, proving to me that even a smooth and glossy surface doesn't prevent silvering if the decals don't adhere properly. The larger decals on the D-Day Eagle worked quite nicely, and their quality seemed much better than of those for the MSIP version. This larger decal had to be wrapped around the nose of the aircraft, which was also no big deal. There were also a lot of small stencils, so applying all the decals to the two models took me quite some time. While my D-Day Eagle doesn't carry any armament, I wanted to arm the MSIP version to the teeth. Therefore I had to paint and decal 6 MRAMs, 2 sidewinders, as well as 3 fuel tanks. I counted a total of 138 decals just on the missiles. The low adhesiveness of some of the decals didn't help with motivation, but I still invested a few hours into the process. Once all the decals were in place, I used the dark wash to accentuate the panel lines and all the rivets I had created in the beginning. I was quite pleased with the result on the MSIP Eagle, so I also added a slightly thinned down wash to the D-Day Eagle. Here you can see how nicely the wash flows into the panel lines. I used a damp microfiber cloth to remove the excess wash from the surfaces. I assume that the F-15 in this special livery is well maintained in real life, but I just love a bit of weathering on my models. Now it was time to add all the pylons and armament to the models. As I said, my MSIP Eagle is fully armed, while the D-Day Eagle only carries empty pylons. Then I added some antennas and other smaller parts before moving on to unmasking the canopy frames. I polished the clear parts but wasn't entirely satisfied with the result. Therefore I gave this product called Looks Like Glass another try. You simply dip the parts into the bottle and after allowing them to cure, they acquire a shiny and polished appearance. However, note that this won't remove any scratches. As you can see, I mounted the canopy and air brake in the open position on the D-Day F-15. That's also the version where I mounted the flaps at an angle. The MSIP F-15 on the other hand has all panels closed, except for the landing gear of course. So to summarize this project, well, I expected more to be honest. As you saw, there were quite some fitting issues and the decals proved challenging to apply due to their low adhesiveness. The paint jobs on the other hand were relatively straightforward and I quite liked the weathered appearance of the Eagles, especially the MSIP version. This was also the first time I built two models simultaneously, and while it isn't exactly a time saver, I might consider doing it again if I got two similar kits. However, it's now time for a much larger project, the Svesta C-130 Hercules, which I'm building for someone in Qatar. If you want to see that project as well as more photos of my other projects, check out my Facebook and Instagram channels. So that's all about the F-15 Eagle dual build. As always, I would love to hear your feedback. Which one do you like better? The 75th anniversary Eagle in its special scheme or the F-15 MSIP-2 in its classic two-tone camo? I'm looking forward to your comments and I hope you have a great day. Bye!